All right, we're going to take a look at basic safety. This is a really important slide for a place like Grampians, or really Great Ocean Road and Wilson's, but in particular Grampians. The photo you're looking at there is from the balconies at the Grampians. It's one of the places you need to be really careful when visiting and controlling your group. So we're going to talk about a few different things. Falling in ledges, obviously a really important one. There's also a very hidden danger we'll talk about in detail. First aid, legal consequences and legal liabilities, clear communication, how to communicate to your group about some of these issues in a way that doesn't ruin their day. And warning fatigue, that's an interesting one. I haven't got a slide on that, but that's basically when you provide so many warnings that people are now fatigued by seeing so many warnings and they don't pay attention. And also talking about another type of repercussion, which is the TOL, to operator license, which we can lose if we don't control our group. But one of the first things that I always tell people when I'm on a tour is that the places we're going to aren't theme parks. So falling deaths are a possibility, and the reason I tell people these aren't theme parks is that all the affordances that they've come to expect by living in civilized society don't exist out in these places. So there's no network connection. There's no ambulance that will come and get them in 5 or 10 minutes. There's no lifeguards on duty at some of the lakes and beaches. There's snakes around. There's all sorts of things that do present themselves as a danger, not just to attendees of your tour, but also to yourself. So there's a lot of things to keep in mind. And at the end of the day, the tour guide and the company are responsible. And it's not just about ethical responsibility, but it's also about keeping your own sanity. You never want to go through a situation where someone has died on one of your tours, and it can be quite traumatic. So I think just by having this slide here and going through this process and preventing that from happening, it's a really good investment of time, both for yourself and for the person that you can potentially save by providing good education and providing good mechanisms to prevent anything serious happening to customers. So as I said in another slide, I think somewhere that you could actually prevent someone's death either on your tour or in the future by providing really good education around safety and just some of the stuff I said a moment ago about these places not being theme parks. So the first one is falling deaths. So on the left-hand side, this is Baroka Lookout from the left-hand side view, and that's the town down there, Halls Gap. On the right-hand side, we have the balconies, which is a 10-minute walk from Reed's Lookout. That's the top balcony, which is by far the most dangerous. And this one is not so dangerous, but both of them do have about an 80-meter plus drop. I'm not entirely sure. I think there's some trees underneath. But there may be definitely some direct hard surfaces that you would fall on if you slipped off there. So in terms of probability, you have probability of if people were going on these ledges. Let's just talk about that for a moment. Let's say it's a 1 in 1,000 person chance that someone's going to fall off that ledge, and usually, the people that are at high risk are the ones that are a bit nervous because they don't normally do this sort of thing. They're people, it's when the wind is a bit higher. It's when they've got shoes that are a bit more smoothed out because they've been worn down. It's when it's rainy because the rocks become a bit more slippery. It's when it's on a decline instead of an incline rock. There's a lot of different factors, but let's just say that's a 1 in 1,000 chance of something like that happening. If you're running a tour with a group of 56 people and maybe 15 people, if you don't control them, go out on these ledges, it's only a matter of time until someone falls off. So, from a clear probabilistic standpoint, it's just a ticking time bomb if you don't control that group. There's very easy ways to control that group as well. I should probably be reading through some of these notes here. Okay, so ledges are slippery, people are nervous, and we take hundreds, if not thousands of people per year if it only takes a 1 in 1,000 to fall. So the way to prevent people from going out on the ledges is obviously, firstly, clear communication. And we'll talk about that a bit later on. But one of the things that I do is I stand at the edge of the fence, both at Baroka Lookout and the balconies, and I prevent people from walking through. Now, as soon as someone gets through, you're already on the back foot, because if they see other people past that fence line, they won't pay any credence to what you're saying. They'll ignore you entirely, and they'll push past you, and they'll start even to the point that they'll start crying. That happened to one of our tour guides, that she said, she came for that photo, to risk her life to take a photo. It's I guess you could consider it pretty narcissistic, because all they want to do is post it to Facebook when you could just sit there and enjoy some of the photos. Sorry, not the photos, but the actual view of the place. A lot of people do go to these destinations for Instagrammability and to show that they've been to these destinations. So the first way to prevent that is to not let the first person get through. As soon as you have a line, if you're trying to break up a line, you're already too late, and you're going to get really upset customers. If you isolate them down to individuals as they're trying to pass through, and you've made it clear over the speaker system they can't go through, then they haven't got any foot to stand on, and you just have to be super clear. No, you can't go through. Usually what I'll tell them is that we face fines and they face fines from the park rangers, and we could lose our tour operator license. So any tour operators, actually, we don't currently have a tour operator license. It's a bus operator that we work with that would lose their license, TOL. But we need to protect that, and we need to protect our customers as well, sometimes from their own foolishness, as it's been in the past. So, but the interesting thing is that no one on these tours would ever climb up a building and start taking selfies, but they go out on extremely dangerous rock faces, and they want to do that just for the photo. So it's an interesting situation. And we eventually do find out if tour guides are protecting customers. This is a customer here who I actually saw her at Wilson's. She couldn't make it on board because she was sick, and I saw this photo here, which you might recognize from that. And we see this all the time. Customers put as their profile picture, and then we say, oh, you went to Grampians. You search their name, we find their ticket, then you can find the tour guide. And I'm not too happy when tour guides aren't controlling that group, because that's their responsibility. So we eventually do find out what's going on. That was pretty quick too, that this person messaged through. So please just make sure that you're looking after customers. Drowning. So this is the next hazard. I actually thought there would be more people in 1 year that would drown. 45 in Victoria, 4 in Sydney. It's usually quite big news when someone does drown. Interesting thing is it's 74% are male, 26% female. And the other interesting thing is that you haven't got any pool lifeguards or indoor pools at people. It hasn't made the top 3 locations. Now, myself and Christian, who is another tour guide currently at New to Melbourne, we're both were previously trained I keep mixing those two up. Lifeguards. We're both trained lifeguards. We had our first aid level 2. We had spinal training if people injured their spine. We had oxygen therapy training, and worked as lifeguards. That's how we met each other. And a lot of people, you just realize how safe people aren't around water. They take it for granted, and it's a silent and it's an unanticipated killer. It really is, and people think they're entirely safe, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. Alcohol increases the risk of drowning, particularly at beaches. You see a lot of families, they'll let the kids run around because they're blind drunk. I hear that. I used to hear that from beach lifeguards all the time, as does obviously an inability to swim. I've been told stories of people seeing young kids in a swimming pool, and they're in the deep end and they just jump in. There's this man from India, he's about 40 years old, just jumped in the deep end, drowned himself. He just got a membership that day. That's the story I was told. So inability to swim is another deadly killer. And if you are Australian, don't take for granted the fact that you were most likely given swimming lessons when you were younger. If you weren't, that's okay. But a lot of Australians are given, as part of their schooling, swimming lessons, and we take it for granted that Australians are quite literate in terms of swimming. So learning to swim and teaching your kids to swim is a great idea and could help. This is one thing I say on the tours as well. Could prevent their death, because water is just really underestimated. Through proper education while on your tour, you could prevent someone's death on one of your tours or help prevent their death in the future. And I should say through education. Education. Okay, moving on. We're going to talk about some situations. This one was recent. We actually ran a tour the day after this happened. Mackenzie Falls, January 2018, 1 death. The screenshot you're looking at there is actually of the woman that caught the death or the drowning on her GoPro. And it was this group of males over here. What you don't know is that those rocks back there are covered in moss and algae. And I wasn't able to find the video to actually see what happened, but this guy would have been in arm's reach of these other guys that he's friends with, and he still drowned, and they couldn't pull him out. And we'll talk about a few of the things in a moment, but I believe there's a good chance that he slipped and hit his head, cracked it open, fell unconscious, and then drowned in the water. And they actually weren't able to find his body until the next day, and they needed to find divers, which meant that his body wasn't buoyant, wasn't on the surface, it had gone under. And there's indications from two of the reports I'll show you that there is, I believe, an undercurrent. There may be an undercurrent that sucks people under. I'm not entirely sure of that. So if they do fall unconscious, then their bodies are sucked under. And we'll talk about that in a moment, but I just wanted to point that out. There were more than 40 people, including an off-duty lifeguard. The lifeguard jumped in, but he said it was so deep and the pressure was intense, she said. We all told him not to risk it. So, even being in that such close reach, these guys weren't able to save him. So it's a real risk. Just talking to a tour guide a moment ago, and he said that if you swim from this side to the other, even during summer, it's intensely cold, and he says that you can't breathe. And I haven't actually swum across there. I've even heard from our customers before we started implementing really rigid safety. And we actually didn't even know that people had died here. We just saw signs that said "Don't swim," and we assumed that it was because there was something wrong with the water. But no, it was because people had died. But they, the park rangers had refused to put up fencing or even put in a lifeguard. If they had, they probably would have prevented this guy's death. So that's just one thing to keep in mind, is that this guy has died here, and I'm not sure if it's from the water coming down or whatever it is, but it's there's something going on that's to suck this guy under, and they couldn't pull him out. So this lifeguard's actually had to swim around and look for him. So that's one thing you just need to be careful of, and you got to deal with customer expectations as well, because a lot of customers will say they want to get in the water, and you're preventing them from doing that. So it's just about wording things carefully, so that people can enjoy the day, see the sights, and maybe even put their feet in, but don't go swimming out. Definitely don't go on this ledge. Don't do that. You got to take your safety into your own hands, and that's a message that I'm giving to my customers. It's a 25-year-old man, believed to be of Taiwanese national, who lived in Australia. Yep, at 5 p.m. So nothing else surrounding it. I don't believe there's any diabetes or any heart attack or anything. It was just slipped on the rock, and I think he hit his head. And that's what happened. Yeah, so the next story is a more horrific one. And it's hard not to be doomy and gloomy. I mean, Grampians is a really beautiful place, but you need to be aware of this stuff. And I think it's good to go in, and you can help educate your customers on these tours about what's going on by knowing about this stuff. So there was 4 people that died. I think it was a 12-year-old swam. She slipped in. So it makes me think again, what's happening with this? With this area where people are slipping in. I think it may have been on the dry side, not on. I don't think the 12-year-old would have been up there. Then I think it was the 17-year-old that slipped in, and then it was So there was 4 people. I think it was an uncle and maybe a father, a 12-year-old. The 14-year-old almost died, and this father, he's an older gentleman. I'm not sure if he's the grandfather or related. I'm not so sure. None of them could swim, so it was just a horrible thing to happen to this family. And there was 30 to 40 people, I believe, around. I'm just trying to read through this article while talking. 30 to 40 people around that didn't do anything. They were confused. Oh, there it is. We're surprised none of the 30 to 40 people around the scene were helping. I guess they just panicked. Everyone was aghast at what was going on. It was just unbelievable. So this guy, Scott, he'd been in Australia for less than 2 months, jumped in the water, unaware of how many people were in trouble. At first, he thought only 2 men needed help. He dragged out one body, then went back for a second person he had seen, despite his lungs hurting. So this guy, I couldn't understand at first why that was. But these bodies, I don't believe that he's pulled out, were on the surface. I think he's had to swim down and pull these guys out. The second man was well underwater, and Mr. Scott had to dive to search for him. Both the men he pulled out died. So this guy's, unbelievable. This guy's pulled out 2 people. But 30 to 40 people around, no one does anything, no lifeguards, no reception, and they would have had to get a helicopter in there, most likely, or someone out there very quickly to pull those people out. But certainly by that point, it's too late. So this is another situation where people just weren't aware of the dangers. And another thing I'll point out is if you try to jump in to save one of these guys and they're bigger than you, they're going to pull you under. That's one thing that you learn as a lifeguard is that, well, one part of the training is that you got to swim 200 meters with someone, carrying that person, keeping their airway open and keeping their spine straight, particularly if they've cracked their skull open on a rock underneath the water. They might have a spinal injury, so then you got to stabilize their neck so they become a fucking quadriplegic, right? But if these people are still panicking, they're gonna try and pull you down to get it, as much in the air as they can, because they're struggling for life at that point. So they actually may drown you and themselves if you do try to get in to help them. So you just got to be aware of this stuff and just be really careful about what's going on and just talk to customers. We'll talk about communication now. Good communication is something I do particularly on Grampians. I'll tell people about all the just the things to be aware of at Wilson's and Great Ocean Road, but for Grampians, I talk quite a bit about this, and I just I try to keep it on a positive note. But you just need to keep people make people aware. So I'll read this out now. I think you need to read and memorize this, or your own version of it that covers the same points, but I'll read it now. Keep in mind that the places we're going to visit are not theme parks. Grampians in particular is a place that is beautiful, but there's a few hidden dangers you may not know about, and people have lost their lives for not respecting nature and not knowing how to keep safe. For instance, there's a beautiful waterfall at Grampians that we're visiting called Mackenzie Falls. In January 2018, a group of people were under the waterfall, and I don't think they realized, but the moss and algae is very slippery there on the rock. One of them slipped, and we think he may have hit his head and fallen into the water, and then he drowned. So as we were talking about a moment ago, I think that's what's occurred. He was right next to his friends when it happened, and they still couldn't save him. So you need to take safety seriously and remember that safety is always your first priority. Please look at the signs in the area and stay safe. So there's signs up in the area that say don't swim. Another 4 people died in 2014 in the exact same spot because none of them could swim. There was 30 to 40 people around, only meters away, and there was only one person. I haven't finished that. Just forget that. I should say there was only one person that was helping out. The ledges that we'll visit are another beautiful sight, but they're also another danger. One of the ledges in particular has quite smooth rock, and it wouldn't take a strong wind to blow someone off and 80 meters to the ground. So please stay off the ledges for your own safety. The park rangers, I usually say something like, the park rangers are always giving people fines for stepping out onto the ledges, so your trip could become an expensive one if you're not careful. Also make note that there's no lifeguards on duty either, at Mackenzie Falls. As a tip, if you're at the beach with your friends sometime in the future, make sure that you always go to a part where the lifeguards are on duty and that you can swim between the flags that lifeguards are set up. A bit of trivia for you: no one has ever drowned in Australia while swimming between the flags at the beach. And then I usually close it out by saying, one of the good things about going on a tour with a tour guide to some of these beautiful places is that they should educate you about the country or the area that you're visiting, but they should also educate you on how the dangers. Okay, I haven't written that out properly. Educate you on the dangers in the area and how to avoid them. You never know, it might save. Let's just try that again. You never know, it might someday save your life or the life of someone you care about. So I try to make it a pretty casual thing and keep it upbeat, and also talk about I like to bring that up because I'm like, I'm not trying to make it doom and gloom, but this is part of the service that we provide. We want to educate you guys on some of the dangers so that you can, just be safe while you're out there. I think that's an important thing to do. Okay, we've got a few more slides. Shortfall trauma and ethical and legal considerations. Mackenzie Falls. Again, we've had, I think it was an Asian girl that slipped on this one of the steps and fell down and had I'm not sure if it was severe shock or whatever it was. I wasn't there. If it was someone over 65, there's a good chance. Well, there's a stronger possibility they could die from that fall. Elderly people have broken their hips and died, and there are sometimes people over that age bracket. When it rains, stones will be slippery, and if it rains, it's probably cold. So people don't use the hand railings because the hand railings have cold steel. So it increases the likelihood that they could slip. And exhaustion's another thing, because there's quite a bit of steps along the way. So I just tell people to take their time. If you're feeling tired, just step aside and just take a break. So we have had at least one person slip on these steps. So just always make sure you tell people about Mackenzie Fall. There's so much to tell them about Mackenzie Falls that they're just not aware of. These are really hidden dangers, and they wouldn't know about them unless you tell them. Okay, so another one is severe torn ligament, sprained ankle. This happens more than you'd think on tours, and there is a real legal element to this. To any of this stuff. You don't want to go through the coroner's court and a full investigation. It can really probably haunt you for quite some time. So, that's why it's just good to be safe rather than sorry. So this is from a customer. I went on one of your bus tours to the Grampians last Sunday, the 1st of October on the hike. I twisted my ankle halfway through. I don't know what that means, halfway through. I went to see the doctor the day after, and he confirmed that I have a torn ligament. When it happened, my foot swell within a few minutes. I couldn't walk. The reason I said, so she just said, you didn't have a first aid kit. The tour guide was good, but you need a first aid kit. I couldn't believe this when I found out about this. And this is exactly why on the tour guide report form that it asks you to check the first aid kit and check the contents on every single tour. It's not good enough just to have a first aid kit there. It needs to have a compression bandage, just some basic first aid stuff. A compression bandage would have been good for her. Even some chemical ice that I think you can break it and it just turns into ice, and you can immediately give this person RICE, which is rest, incline, compress. Oh no, RICE. Rest. I'm just trying to think of I. C is compress, elevate. Oh, I is ice. Jesus, I'm an idiot. I is for ice. Now that brings up another thing: is should you be giving first aid? The answer is no. If you're not qualified in first aid, you're not a medical doctor, you do not give first aid, because if you make it worse, they do have a legal basis to take you to court. And if you make someone's situation worse, like that. There's certain, I think, snake bites or spider bites when I did my first aid, that if you compress them, you can amplify and increase the damage that venom does to a victim. And if you do that and you don't know what you're doing, and you make someone worse, firstly you make them worse, and secondly you'll be legally liable. So if you're not qualified as first aid level 2, senior first aid, or whatever you might have, then all you can do is provide someone with what they need and give your opinion. And even then, I'd say in a court of law, if you're the tour guide, it could be argued that you have a position of authority, and that you giving your opinion was as someone who's trained, and then they could then hold you liable. So I think you just need to be, and this is, if this happens, you need to say to people, I can't treat you. I don't have, any certifications but what I can do is give you stuff, and you can apply that. Whatever you need, just tell me what you need. I'll give it to you. Okay. Now in this situation, what happened, I think there's, so this is actually originally in the tour operations manual. In the journal for the Tom. So for the tour operations manager, I was in the journal. There's some more notes there as well. But one of the issues that we had is that the tour guide could have taken this customer back down to Hall's Gap after dropping those customers off, and the tour guide could have stayed with the customers. The driver could have gone down with this injured customer, got them some ice, and probably some compression bandages as well, and then come back before that group needed to move. Instead, she had to wait until the end. So she was on that bus. To give you an idea what a sprained ankle, that's quite a severe, what is it? Severe torn ligament. So there's different levels. I think that would probably, and I'm not a doctor, so you need to sort of take that at your own evaluation, but I'd say that's a level 3 torn ligament. That's the day after. There was someone that was on a Wilson's Promontory tour, and you can just see the huge amount of swelling that's on the foot. You can see up here as well. And you just need to be aware of that. So where that happened was on this part of Wilson's Promontory. The person was jumping from one rock to the other. landed wrongly, and it wasn't too good. So that's probably what she was explaining. Probably to a lesser degree, she might have had some bruising, but but at least she got picked up, so she got immobilized. So she rested her ankle. So, it's good to know some first aid. I mean, ideally, you want to get your first aid qualifications. You should be doing that as a tour guide anyway. They're, when I did it was about $90, and it's really good training. I think, more people should have it. It's a really useful qualification to have, because if any sort of crisis situation does occur, you can step in and take action. And particularly when you're in these locations, you want to be able to, sort of deal with that. Okay, so other situations to be aware of, and this is not an exhaustive list. Severe allergic reaction to nuts or bee stings. There's 2 examples. Severe hypoglycemia, insulin shock from diabetes sufferers. Snake bites, brown snakes, tiger snakes. Hasn't happened yet. Hopefully won't happen. Usually won't happen unless people are harassing those snakes. Spider bites if they're climbing trees. We're trying to get into rocks, in areas where there's lots of rocks and pulling stuff up. Cardiac respiratory problems. We had a lady on our tour. This is the last time 2 weeks ago. She's about here on Squeaky Beach. She couldn't make it up Mount Oberon, and she's just making a joke with her friend that she just have to call an ambulance to pick her up. But she had a pacemaker, so she couldn't walk too far. So it may not be a heart attack. It may be some sort of respiratory problem, but that was a pacemaker issue. So there's people with all sorts of medical conditions that you are going to deal with. Replacement joints like a hip. I'm not sure, if someone falls over and has an injury, you just got to be mindful of people's different medical treatments and things that they've had in the past. One that's, again, overlooked is the sun, ultraviolet rays, which can cause sunstroke from lack of water. So again, always keep people hydrated. I went on this Wilson's Promontory tour last weekend. I took this whole group up, and I said to them, guys, get water and get sunscreen and get a hat. I said that to them, but before we got to Mount Oberon. This is at the first stop, Kelly's Cafe in Currumborough, and there was a few that didn't. And I looked around, and I just know that you got to tell these guys to get that stuff. Some of them looked for a hat, which is really good, but I saw 1 or 2 guys that just had really red faces, and they were fucking burnt as, because the amount of walking that's involved in Wilson's Promenade is really beautiful. But you got to be, you got to realize that you're exposed to the sun for that whole time. And if you don't have water, and I was like, I'm looking at my skin now from that tour, I'm fine. I didn't have a problem at all because I just kept applying sunscreen when I was walking up. But you're exposed for a good 4 hours, sometimes under trees, sometimes directly in the sun. Particularly for Wilson's is one that you really are super exposed while you're down at the beach. And of course, if there's any other situations you can think of that haven't been covered here, please let me know. And we want to discuss all possible issues and ways that we can anticipate and retrain staff to avoid them. But as I said, I think the key point here is that you have the possibility to prevent someone's death or even just little basic injuries, things like this. That sort of thing can be prevented. You just got to talk to customers and share your experiences and spend a bit of time on the microphone and just learn how to communicate with them. So, I think the main thing you want to do is prevent someone's death, obviously, and I think you can do that both through the water and the ledges. The ledges, we haven't had anyone fall off. We've never had anything happen to one of our customers apart from that sprained ankle. And ever since then, we've put in a lot of processes in place to protect people. Always check for that first aid kit. Always look inside it and familiarize yourself with that first aid kit. Certainly if you have a first aid level 2, a senior first aid, you may be using that quite a bit. And don't be afraid to ask for supplies from us. In the future, we might actually set up as a task that people have to go check out that first aid kit and make an itinerary of things that are in there, because those are compression bandages from these types of injuries and gauze. If someone's cut their arm open or their leg open on something, that's always really good to get. But I just think this is a really valuable little presentation to be aware of. It's certainly more training than I had when I first started tour guiding, and I'm really glad that we've been able to protect our customers. I guess with this one, with Grampians, Baroka Lookout or balconies, it does become a bit more difficult because there's 1 or 2 tour operators that just don't give a fuck about their customers' safety and they just let them walk everywhere. And when our customers see that, they go crazy and they start jumping the barricades. But if you stand at those barricades and anyone trying to walk past, you say, no, you can't walk past. I don't want to get a fine. You don't want to get a fine. I don't want anyone to die. Just don't be stupid. There's other ways. And usually what I'll say to them is there's some places that have even better lookouts without the risk of death. So there are places that have a drop, but it's not so significant. It might be 8 foot or something. So, and I used to take people to those spots and take photos of them because they're just as nice as well. But these two in particular are just absolutely stupid spots to climb. I can tell you that this ledge, declining down, being smooth rock, yeah, it's not the safest place to try to be climbing all over, particularly if someone's nervous and shy. And I've seen one girl trip as she was stepping up these rocks. So I'm just reading through my notes to see if that's everything. Yeah, I guess the other thing I was going to say is that at some point these ledges will break. We saw this with the 12 apostles when one of them collapsed. Is that these things weren't designed by engineers; they're designed by nature. And at some point, if they're going to break, and the time they're going to break is when there's weight on them. They're probably not going to snap off by themselves. It's going to be when you've got a group of people being really stupid and 4 or 5 people here, and it's just too much weight for this thing to load, and it just snaps off. So, the same thing with this ledge here. It might look strong, but you don't know what condition that rock's in. And when it does snap, it's going to have people on it because it's going to have weight. So that's something to think about. Yeah, okay, cool. And I guess the other thing is obviously protect the tour operator license. That's another reason we want to, because we actually have had one of our competitors say that we're letting people over the ledges. They didn't like us running tours. So that's the type of thing that they'll do, is they'll report you. And the park rangers do take it pretty seriously. So, anyway, that's it. We'll catch you in the next video.